Welcome to the Real Estate Investing Podcast, where we help you unlock your potential freedom through land investing, real estate investing, and entrepreneurship. Hey everyone, this is episode 145 of the Real Estate Investing Podcast, discussing how we evaluate land. I'm your host, Andrew Apke, joined again by my brother and business partner, Ron Apke. Before we get into the show, let's go over a question from one of our featured Discord members. Today's question is from Doug. Doug asked, I'm having a little trouble determining how to pull good comps. I've watched the videos a few times, but I'm still having trouble determining which properties are good comps and which properties are outliers. Really good question, Doug. Ron, you want to handle?
Yeah, Doug, this is a phenomenal question. And we have people ask this question quite a bit. And it's just honestly, it is a market by market thing. And you want to make sure the key to pulling good comps for pricing is making sure you're not getting outliers. And that's on the high end and low end. So, outliers on the low end, maybe it's just public record things that aren't great data pools. Or on the high end, you could have things with attributes, whether it's waterfront, just a really good view, a really good location, a commercial property. So you need to pull up each of these comps and look into them and kind of determine, like, okay, let's read the description. Making sure that it was actually listed for sale, actually went pending, and actually sold is really important. And it doesn't say public record if you're looking at Zillow. So I look at all that, and then you read the description. Like, is there something special about this property that increased the value, or something that is lowering the value where I think this comp is under market value? You do not, and we say it so much, you do not need 50 good comps. You don't need 20 good comps. You need a few good comps to price accurately. Don't mix in good comps with comps that you think are average or below average or could be skewing your data. You want to be in a median happy place with your pricing.
I agree. And another good thing we've been talking about a lot, Ron, is just we've been looking at for sale properties more than we used to for whatever reason, because
Yeah.
things are slowing down. We want to look at the gauge the interest on the for sale side too, see how many views, see how many saves, see if it's priced appropriately, right? If that 5 acre land's worth $50,000 and we think it's worth 50,000, let's make sure it's getting a good amount of traction on Zillow and those other sites, Ron. But other than that, let's get into the show. How do we evaluate land? Ron, first let's take this away and first thing we always do when we get something back or are evaluating a members deal is we look at the land quality. That's the very first thing we do.
Yeah, and I think we do it some like we have all of our webinars recorded. If you guys are members or something, watching those, looking back, you can get a really good feel for it and how we do it. So yeah, like the first thing I don't pull up. So we use a software called MapRight. If you guys aren't familiar, and that's how we evaluate basically on the computer, looking at the boundaries of the property, everything like that. But I'm just going to look at the satellite image and I'm going to look like, okay, let me get a feel for the land before I pull up any of these overlays that is going to show me a slope. Let me just get a feel for what it actually looks like, what my opinion on the land is before anything else, what the shape is. I think shape we look at, like that is our number one thing. Wouldn't you say, Dan? Shape's like the first thing we look at.
Absolutely, because it's outlined right there. It's just generally the first thing that shows up anyways.
Yeah, and there's good shapes and there's bad shapes. You want a shape that makes sense for an end buyer. Put your mind in the end buyer's mind and determine based on that. And then we start looking at slope. We look at wetlands. We look at floodplain. We look at obviously, like I said, road access. And then we'll dive deeper into all that stuff and then start evaluating the land as a whole. But that first initial thing, like you usually get a good feeling or bad feeling within about, I don't know, 10 to 30 seconds. Not saying that's our due diligence, but I usually understand land pretty fast.
Yeah, you can see a lot just from the appearance of it when it's outlined. And some of the things we'll look at early on, the first thing we look at, like Ron said, is the shape of the property. Then we actually want to detect or understand the access, right? Is it direct road frontage? Is there a dirt road coming off the road? Is there an easement? There's all kinds of access things that we run into. And that's something that's going to really, really matter on the back end when you're trying to sell it. Like we said, Ron, you always want to put yourself in the future buyer's shoes. And if there's not good access, then that's going to be an issue for the future buyer. Then we look at things, Ron, slope. Someone, I think it was Miran, asked the other week, how do we evaluate a good slope? I think we threw out a number like 15%, start there. But it's more of an eye test than anything. Like, is it buildable? Are there neighbor properties on that, or neighboring properties that are built on a similar slope? If that slope is the exact same on a ridge across and both sides of your property is built on and it's the exact same same slope as your two neighbors are on, then there's a good chance that lowers the risk of the slope because there are people, building in that area. And that's kind of what I wanted to dive into a little bit, Ron. Let's talk about the land quality. I just talked a little bit about slope, a little bit about access. Let's talk about a little bit other attributes and features that we look for that determine that land quality that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you also have the features that add a ton of value to land, whether it's like very basic, which you'll probably see more times than the other features, or one or more times, is like a partially cleared land where you have some room to potentially put a house. The two things you probably see the most in terms of like attributes that add some value are creeks running through the land, as well as, like I said, cleared area for a house. So those are things that are going to increase the value of your land or make it more desirable. And when I say increase the value, Dan, but I think I more so mean increase the desirability, which in turn has a chance to increase the value, but it's gonna at minimum increase the speed or increase the speed at which you can sell the property. So having any attributes that increase desirability, and again, think as the end buyer. I think we just need to keep pushing that thing, Dan, because I think thinking as the end buyer, what an end buyer is going to want, or at least what you think they're going to want, is going to be what they typically want. So if you have a nice creek running through it, get pictures of that when you're marketing and stuff like that. Those are very good attributes. What other things do we see, Dan, in terms of, let's talk about the good things and before we talk about like the negatives of the land, which we've kind of talked about with slope.
Any water features are always a really big plus. If it's great hunting land and there's a bunch of deer on the property, people wanna see that type of stuff. Trees, people would like to see ground photos, get ground photos, they wanna see what
Yeah.
kind of timber and trees are on there. A lot of people ask about that. Mainly water, trees, if there's any cleared paths anywhere around,
Mm,
sometimes cleared access is really a big one, like, if there's an old building site where they started to build and there's a nice clear or there's a mobile home on it and there's a nice cleared path to it and then 50, 100 feet of cleared spot to build, that's an attribute. Obviously, septic, having a septic system, a well, utility setup's a big attribute, but always confirm that with the county, obviously. We see that a lot, people saying, "Oh, there's septic on it." Okay, well, doesn't add me much value if your uncle installed this half-ass septic, Ron, and, it's just not legal. We can't advertise the septic, therefore it's not gonna increase the value because we
mm.
can't advertise it because it's not legal or it's not up to county standards. So things like that, I think, are some of the main ones, Ron. Am I missing some?
No, I think that's about it. Like if you get land with those things, like it's not necessarily like if you get a creek, it's not like, okay, this is a home run deal. Like you want to confirm all the other attributes, do all your other due diligence. But we run in like you'll get like streams and then you'll get creeks. Like those creeks that are legitimate creeks are extremely desirable for end buyers. All this stuff that we're talking about is, but this is going to be 10% of your deals you get back, maybe 20%, but it's not going to be a huge portion. So on the other end, probably 40-50% of our purchase agreements are going to have things on the other end where the land isn't necessarily, it's far from perfect, whether it's got a slope or it's got a gully. A gully is essentially when something drops off and then comes back up, so you'll have a big drop off and then it'll come back up. Those are things you want to keep out and keep an eye out for. But I think I'm trying to think the most common wetlands, you get floodplain. All these things are things you got to get a feel for it and determine whether. So let's talk about wetlands and floodplain, Dan, before we move on. Um, so wetlands is essentially year-round water. There is going to be year-round water typically in wetlands, and it is not desirable at all. Maybe for bigger properties like duck hunting. Am I right, Dan? In certain areas.
Yeah, some duck hunting, and I mean, it depends the size. If you have a 100-acre property and 20 acres, if it's wetland, that might not matter as much as if you have
Yeah.
10 acres and 8 of it's wet.
Yeah, I think we just bought a property that it's 30 acres. And it's probably 5 acres wet or something like that, and, like, it is wet. It's not like it's like, okay, it's wet. It's standing water, probably over a foot, I would imagine, in those areas, and what they are essentially is just a low areas in the earth, that just collect water, and it makes perfect sense. Like, it doesn't take a lot of rain, or it doesn't even take constant rain for these to stay wet because the water just that's where the water sits. And then floodplain is a chance of flooding, which floodplain, if you have a 20-acre property and 10 acres are in a floodplain, I'm not that concerned if it's not a wetlands. Where wetlands, if you're 10 acres, half your property is wet, I'd be more concerned. Floodplain has a chance. Floodplain more so, Dan, you want to look for an area to build. Like, is there enough room for me to put a house, mobile home, whatever it is? Where wetlands is like, you got to decrease the value pretty much no matter what.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wetlands are always worse. Floodplains, you always want to make sure you have a spot to build. That's the biggest
Yeah.
thing. But if it's a floodplain and it's a 100-year flood zone run, it's just the risk of it actually flooding is minimal. But so what I'm saying is your property, like Ron said, is not always going to be wet. So if 18 out of the 20 acres is in a floodplain, but those two beautiful acres to build, and we got drone photos, Ron, and the 18 acres looks dry, it just has a chance to flood every 100 years or whatever that chance is, Ron, whatever floodplain it is in, then I think that makes a difference. You just need to make sure there's a buildable area with the floodplain because it's not going to be wet. But they overlap a lot of times. When you have a wet
Yeah.
land and a floodplain, that obviously means it's wet, Ron.
Yeah, the typical what I see is the typical floodplain without a wetlands is a creek, like or is a creek or a river that is causing it. That's when you can get a floodplain when you're close to a creek or river, not even necessarily on your property, but you have a big creek or a river, a regular sized river. That's when you're going to have that chance, 100-year chance, and you're going to be in a floodplain. Oh, or you have the chance of being in a floodplain, I guess. And you typically won't have wetlands. It will obviously get wet if it does flood, but that's not what we're talking about here. So yeah, I mean, you got to evaluate those things, Dan, and it's hard to kind of over a podcast really give. We can give as detailed as we want, but it's so deal by deal analyzing the land in particular. We never see two deals. Sometimes we see a deal and like, didn't we already review this deal? And we didn't. It's just we look at so many deals, but most deals, pretty much all deals are different. But you can use your knowledge from previous evaluations of deals to kind of help you in the future.
Yeah, and the hardest part, Ron, that I want to get into for the next minute or two is price evaluation. This is the hardest part. So we understand the land. Now we have to evaluate the price. And that's one of the hardest things to do, especially when comps are scarce. It's one of the hardest thing to do in this business, Ron, is actually evaluating the price. So we understand the land. We have a really, really good idea of how this land lays, the different features, attributes, defects it has. Now let's jump in the price and see if this makes sense to buy.
So yeah, I guess the final part of due diligence is that price aspect that we're talking about that you talked about, Dan. So you did all your due diligence. The land checks out, or at least it's checking out decently. You need to now determine if the price makes sense. Bringing the price or bringing the deal to other members, bringing the deal to our Wednesday call is very valuable, where we can look at the deal and kind of do it with you, especially as you're new. If this is your third, fifth deal, like get all these deals, get second eyes on these deals. Maybe you have a local realtor contact that can help you out. But beyond that, Daniel, it also matters when you're evaluating price, evaluating the speed of what price you can sell for. If it's a slower market, doubling your money or potentially doubling your money might not make 100% sense, to be 100% honest. Where it's like buy for 40,000, max sell for 80,000 in 6, 8 months. Where if I'm trying to sell this fast, it might only be $60,000. Does that deal make sense? I don't know. That's something for you to decide. But looking at the market and looking at speed of market, especially being in a recession, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And kind of piecing these two things together that we talked about, Ron, the land quality and the price evaluation. Now we have an overall risk evaluation. We kind of need to bring everything we learned together. And if the land's an A plus, Ron, and the price is questionable, maybe we can afford smaller payouts since the land's great, the market's great. We know it's going to sell fast, like you were just saying. Or vice versa, it's a super slow market, the land's not great, and the price is great, but the land and the market aren't great. We gotta evaluate all 3 things of those, Ron. So the market and location, the price, and the actual land quality, and we bring those 3 together, grade them subconsciously, or you can do it consciously. I've never thought it out like this, Ron. We talked about it a little bit in last episode, but those are the 3 things you need to bring together to make these decisions, Ron, is land quality, price, and then the actual market and location.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing. That can be a definitely like you need to think about those three things before you buy a property, and think about them in combination. Like, try to take yourself out of like the making
Emotional.
money or just wanting a deal or whatever it is. Like, you need to take yourself out of that mindset and just review the deal as you see it on paper. Like it's a reviewable deal on paper and then making a decision based on that. But I don't think I have anything else to add to that, Dan. Like it's something, it's experience. I think experience trumps all with kind of evaluating land deals. It's something most people don't come in. Very few people come in understanding how to really evaluate land deals. But that being said, doing it 10, 15, 20 times and you'll not be an expert, but you'll be well on your way.
Absolutely, Ron. And if the price is great, the land's great, and the market's great, what do we have, Ron?
We got a home run.
We got ourselves a home run, exactly. But it doesn't always pan out that way. Those deals are, I'm not going to say rare, you'll get them, but you'll get more B's than A's, right? You'll get more C plus and B's than A's, and you're going to make a lot of money at it. And those A market, A land quality, and A price come along, and you're like, wow, that's why I got into this business to start. We're buying this for $80,000, going to sell it in 3 weeks for our 220 grand. Those type of deals come, but we're not always going to get those. So we just have to balance what works for our business and our risk profile, Ron. As always, thank you for joining. Please do us a huge favor and like and subscribe our YouTube channel and share this with a friend. It really means the world to Ron and I, but more importantly, it could help change the life of someone else. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next episode.